The United States government wants you to believe that 18 soldiers died of starvation and cold during a routine Arctic expedition in the 1880s, and that the classified documents are just protecting operational details. But if that's true, why are those same files still marked top secret after 140 years? Why do Freedom of Information Act requests get denied with the same national security exemptions used for modern military operations? Welcome aboard Arnie's Brain Train, where I never take the official story at face value, especially when they're still lying about it a century and a half later. I'm Alex Arnold, and today we're time traveling back to 1881 to uncover the dark secrets of the Lady Franklin Bay Expedition, better known as the Greely Expedition. This story is about government cover-ups, suppressed evidence, and the lengths that powerful people will go to protect their reputations. All of my sources are listed in the description below, so feel free to fact-check everything that I say today. But before we dive into this frozen conspiracy, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. You don't ever want to miss any of our adventures. We have new videos coming out every single week. So without further ado, let's get into it. As usual, let's begin by setting the stage. It's 1881, and the world's most powerful nations are racing to plant their flags at the North Pole. The United States, desperate to prove it belongs among the great exploring nations, launches the Lady Franklin Bay Expedition as part of the first international polar year. But pretty immediately, we see the first red flag. While other countries sent civilian scientists, the US sent Signal Corps soldiers under military command. 25 men, led by Adolphus Greely, a career military officer with no Arctic experience, set sail with what seemed like a simple mission: establish a weather station, collect scientific data, and be picked up 2 years later. That's exactly what they wanted everyone to believe. And then our next red flag. The expedition was secretly funded not just by the Signal Corps, but by a mysterious congressional appropriation buried deep in military spending bills. This was $75,000 in 1881, so over $2 million today, hidden in legislation that most congressmen would never read. At that time, who had the power to hide that kind of money? That answer leads us to some very powerful names. Jay Gould, the railroad magnate who controlled Western Union Telegraph Company, had direct ties to the Signal Corps. The Astors, America's wealthiest family, had significant investments in Arctic whaling and sealing operations. And then there's the most intriguing connection of all. The Rothschild banking family had recently acquired massive mining interests in northern Canada. Now, officially this expedition was about weather data. But why would railroad barons and mining interests care about Arctic weather patterns? They weren't interested in the weather. They were interested in what was under the ice. Greely and his men established Fort Conger at Lady Franklin Bay, and for their first year, everything seemed to go according to plan. They collected data, explored the region, and even set a new farthest north record. But here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Greely's men weren't just taking temperature readings. They were conducting geological surveys, mapping mineral deposits, and most importantly, searching for something specific. According to Sergeant David Brainerd's classified field notes, which were discovered decades later in military archives, the expedition had been given secondary orders to locate and verify reports of massive coal deposits in the Arctic archipelago. Coal that could fuel ships, power industrial operations, and most crucially, establish permanent military bases in the Arctic. As 1882 turned into 1883, their promised rescue ship never arrived. The government claimed that ice conditions made rescue impossible, but newly discovered documents tell a different story. The rescue ship Neptune was deliberately held back because military officials were having second thoughts about the expedition's true purpose. According to correspondence between Signal Corps Chief William Hazen and Secretary of War Robert Lincoln, yes, this was Abraham Lincoln's son, there were serious concerns about what Greely's team might have discovered up there. One telegram, partially declassified in 1976, mentions complications rendering territorial claims and potential international incidents. What kind of discoveries could be so sensitive that they'd leave American soldiers stranded in the Arctic? That question is about to get a very disturbing answer. Following Greely's standing orders, the expedition abandoned Fort Conger in August 1883 and began their retreat south to Cape Sabine, where they expected to find supplies and rescue. But when they arrived at Cape Sabine, they found almost nothing, just a few hundred pounds of food for 25 men who needed to survive an entire Arctic winter. But just wait, it gets worse. The supply caches that were supposed to sustain Greely's men had been deliberately reduced. Internal military documents from the 1970s reveal that supply officer Henry Howgate had been ordered to minimize logistical commitments to the expedition. Why would the military abandon their own men? The answer lies in what Greely's team discovered at Fort Conger. What they found was worth killing for. First, let's talk about the coal. Greely's geological surveys had confirmed the existence of massive, easily accessible coal seams throughout the Arctic islands. We're talking about enough coal to fuel the entire American Navy for decades. But here's the kicker. These coal deposits were technically in British territory, and any American mining operations would have violated international law. But the coal discovery was just the beginning. In his final encrypted transmission from Fort Conger, a message that wasn't decoded until 1952, Greely reported finding something he called unusual metallic formations in the permafrost. Modern analysis of these descriptions suggests he may have discovered rare earth minerals, including platinum and possibly even uranium deposits. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a powerful industrialist in 1883. You've just learned that there are billions of dollars worth of natural resources sitting in the Arctic, technically belonging to Britain, but defended by nobody. What would you do? You'd want to establish American claims to that territory as quietly as possible, without starting an international incident. But here's where that plan went horribly wrong. Greely's team also discovered evidence of recent human activity in the areas that were supposed to be uninhabited. They found tool marks on rocks, evidence of systematic mining operations, and most disturbing of all, graves that were far too fresh to be from previous expeditions. Someone else was already up there, and they weren't supposed to be there either. Sergeant Brainerd's diary contains cryptic references to foreign voices in the night and signs of recent habitation. The expedition's photographer, George Rice, took pictures of these mysterious sites before he died, but those photographs were immediately classified and remain so to this day. The most chilling discovery came in the spring of 1883, just before the expedition's retreat. Greely's men found what appeared to be a temporary military installation, abandoned but recent. The site contained Russian-made tools, German ammunition casings, and British naval supplies. Someone was running a secret international mining operation in the Arctic, and the American expedition had stumbled right into the middle of it. This explains why the rescue mission was delayed. The powerful interests behind the expedition realized that they had uncovered a conspiracy involving multiple nations. American industrialists, British mining companies, German steel manufacturers, and Russian fur traders were all secretly collaborating to strip mine the Arctic, with each nation providing plausible deniability for the others. As winter closed in around Cape Sabine, the men began to starve. Their daily rations dropped to a few ounces of bread and some thin soup. One by one, they started dying. The official reports claim that they died of starvation and exposure, but the truth is far more disturbing. Dr. Octave Pavey, the expedition's physician, kept detailed medical records that were immediately classified upon the rescue. These records, partially declassified in 1984, exactly 100 years later, which is suspicious timing, reveal that several men showed signs of poisoning, not just starvation. So here's the real question. Were these men poisoned by contaminated food, or were they silenced because they knew too much? The winter of 1883 to 84 was a nightmare of cold, hunger, and growing desperation. Men were dying every few weeks. Private Charles Henry died in January. Sergeant David Lynn died in February. By March, they were losing someone almost weekly. But here's another aspect that they don't want you to know. Some of these men didn't just die, they were killed. Sergeant David Brainerd's private diary, discovered in 1987 in a trunk in his family's attic, contains entries that were never included in the official expedition records. Brainerd wrote about disciplinary actions that resulted in deaths, and about decisions made by Greely that crossed moral and legal lines. One entry dated March 15, 1884 reads, "Henry spoke too freely about the mines. Greely says he cannot be trusted to remain silent. God help us all." 3 days later, Charles Henry was dead, officially from heart failure and exhaustion. When the rescue ships finally reached Cape Sabine on June 22, 1884, they found 6 barely alive skeletons and 18 corpses. But the condition of those corpses told a story that the government desperately wanted to suppress. Several of the corpses showed clear signs of butchery, systematic removal of flesh from bones, organs carefully extracted. The rescuers' initial reports, before they were heavily edited by military censors, described scenes of horror that went beyond simple survival cannibalism. Lieutenant Frederick Kislingberry's body was found with his skull crushed, but the official cause of death was listed as scurvy. Private Roderick Schneider had clearly been shot in the back, but his death certificate reads chronic diarrhea. The pattern was unmistakable. Men who might have talked about what they discovered were being eliminated. But here's the smoking gun. Remember Private Charles Henry we talked about earlier, who had supposedly died of starvation in January? Well, he was found with a bullet wound in his skull. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but multiple witnesses reported seeing the bullet hole before the body was quickly buried at sea. The rescue expedition's photographer, John Lowe, took dozens of photographs documenting the scene at Cape Sabine. Most of these photographs were immediately confiscated by military officials and remain classified to this day. The few images that survived show clear evidence of systematic dismemberment of the corpses. But here's what's the most disturbing. The dismemberment wasn't random acts of desperate cannibalism. It was methodical, surgical, designed to remove specific organs. Dr. Pavey's medical notes describe the removal of brains and hearts, organs completely inedible to starving men. Why would cannibals waste energy removing organs that they couldn't eat? The answer is terrifying but obvious. Someone was destroying evidence. The organs that were removed were the ones most likely to show traces of poison or other substances that could prove that these men were murdered. Why would the government go to such lengths to hide the truth? Because the Greely Expedition had discovered something that threatened powerful interests on both sides of the Atlantic. The secret international mining consortium couldn't afford exposure, and the American government couldn't admit that they sent soldiers to spy on their allies. When the survivors started talking about foreign installations and international conspiracies, they became liabilities that had to be eliminated. The few who survived were broken, starving, and easily manipulated into accepting the official story. The moment the survivors were rescued, the cover-up began in earnest. The 6 survivors were immediately separated and taken to different hospitals, where they were kept under military guard and forbidden from speaking to reporters. Official debriefings were conducted in secret, and the men were required to sign agreements never to discuss certain aspects of their experience. But the government made one crucial mistake. They underestimated Sergeant David Brainerd. This man had survived 2 years in the Arctic and watched his friends die one by one. He wasn't about to let their deaths be covered up without leaving some record of the truth. Brainerd secretly kept a second diary, written in a code he developed with his brother before the expedition. This diary, hidden in his personal effects and not discovered until after his death in 1946, tells a very different story than his official reports. According to the coded diary, the expedition had been infiltrated from the beginning. Dr. Octave Pavy, the French physician, was actually working for European mining interests. Supply officer Henry Howgate was taking bribes to reduce the expedition's resources. Even some of the soldiers had been bought off by foreign agents. The expedition wasn't just discovering resources, it was caught in the middle of an international espionage operation that involved some of the most powerful people in the world. Adolphus Greely himself became the government's most valuable asset in this cover-up. In exchange for being hailed as a hero and receiving a military promotion, Greely agreed to the official version of events. His published account of the expedition, 3 Years of Arctic Service, carefully omitted the most damaging details and painted the deaths as tragic but unavoidable losses to starvation and cold. But even Greely couldn't resist leaving clues for future generations. Hidden throughout his official account are subtle references that only make sense when you know what to look for. He describes unusual geological formations and unexpected signs of human activity. He mentions political complications that prevented timely rescue. For those willing to read between the lines, Greely was trying to tell the truth without violating his oath of secrecy. The most telling evidence of the cover-up lies in what happened to the physical evidence. The personal effects, journals, and scientific instruments recovered from Cape Sabine were immediately classified. The meteorological data, supposedly the whole point of the expedition, was buried in military archives and never published. If this was really just a scientific mission gone wrong, why classify the scientific results? In 1924, 40 years after the expedition, several European mining companies simultaneously filed territorial claims for the exact same Arctic regions that Greely's team had explored. How did they know where to file claims for areas that were supposedly never surveyed? Because they had been getting intelligence reports all along. The truth is that the Greely expedition discovered something in the Arctic that powerful people wanted to keep a secret. Whether it was evidence of foreign military presence, mineral resources, or an international conspiracy, the government was willing to let American soldiers die rather than risk exposure. But the cover-up goes even deeper than all of this. Research conducted in the 1990s by independent historians revealed that several major American corporations had quietly acquired Arctic mining rights through shell companies immediately after the expedition's return. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, and other industrial dynasties were positioning themselves to exploit the very resources that Greely's men had died protecting. The pattern in the picture always becomes clear when you follow the money. The same people who funded the expedition were the ones who profited from its discoveries, and they were willing to sacrifice American soldiers to keep their secret safe. So here's where it really gets interesting. The Greely Expedition cover-up didn't just end in 1884, it's still active today. In 1959, when Alaska achieved statehood, the federal government quietly transferred massive Arctic land holdings to private corporations. Many of these companies can be traced back to the same industrial families that funded the original Greely Expedition. Coincidence? I don't think so. The classified photographs from Cape Sabine? Still classified after 140 years. The geological surveys? Still buried in military archives. The International Mining Consortium that Greely's men discovered? It evolved into the multinational corporations that control Arctic resources right now. Just think about it. Why is there still so much secrecy around climate change and Arctic exploration? Why do certain countries get preferential treatment for Arctic drilling rights? Why are indigenous peoples still being displaced from traditional lands in the name of resource development? The answer traces back to the same power structures that were established in the 1880s. The people who buried the truth about the Greely Expedition are the same families and institutions that control Arctic policy today. If they were willing to let American soldiers die to protect their secrets in 1884, what are they willing to do today? Every time you hear about accidents in the Arctic, equipment failures that strand research teams, or natural disasters that conveniently destroy evidence of corporate malfeasance, remember the Greely Expedition. The pattern hasn't changed, just the technology has improved. Modern corporations have better ways to eliminate inconvenient witnesses and control information, but the fundamental playbook remains the same. Discover resources, eliminate witnesses, control the narrative. Well, everybody, let's connect all the dots and put everything together. We have a supposedly scientific expedition that was secretly funded by industrial magnates and hidden in military budgets. We have evidence that the expedition discovered massive mineral deposits and stumbled into an international espionage operation. We have systematic murder disguised as survival cannibalism. We have classified evidence that remains hidden after 140 years. And we have the same corporate interests that funded the expedition profiting from Arctic resources to this very day. But most damning of all is we have a pattern of behavior that continues to this day. The techniques used to cover up the Greely expedition, separating witnesses, classifying evidence, controlling the narrative, eliminating threats, are all the same techniques used in every major conspiracy of the past century. The Greely expedition cover-up reveals a core template for how powerful interests operate. They use official institutions to pursue private goals. They eliminate anyone who threatens their plans, and they control the historical narrative to prevent future exposure. It's interesting how often we dismiss conspiracy theories as crazy that often follow the same patterns as documented historical conspiracies. The difference between a conspiracy theory and a historical fact is often just time and declassification of documents. The next time someone tells you that the government wouldn't do that or corporations don't have that much power, remember Cape Sabine. Remember how quickly heroes became inconvenient witnesses and how easily the truth can be buried deeper than the bodies in the Arctic ice. The men who died up there were victims of a system that values profit over human life, secrecy over truth, and power over justice. The system is still operating today, and the only way to fight it is to recognize its patterns and refuse to be fooled by its lies. Well, everybody, that is it, and that is why these Arctic expedition records are still classified after 140 years. What do you think is really hidden in those files? Are the same corporate interests still controlling Arctic resources today, or is there something even more disturbing that they're protecting? Drop your theories in the comments below. Do me a favor, and if this story opened your eyes to how historical cover-ups really work, make sure you're subscribed to Arnie's Brain Train and hit that notification bell. We're always digging up the buried truths that make history far more interesting than they taught you in school. And remember, all of my sources in today's investigation are listed in the description, so you can continue your own research into this Arctic conspiracy. I hope to see you guys on the next adventure through the mysteries that they don't want you to discover. Thank you so much for riding the brain train with me today, and remember, the world isn't always this simple, but it's always this interesting. See you guys next time. Bye.